Hi, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Judgment Day. I'm Lorne Honickman. We have a federal election just a few days away. Lots of people talking about it. But for many people, the election, as important as it is not really as important as what's happening in their lives today. And we see that in the context of a lot of different issues, of course, during this pandemic. We talked about it from an employment issue, people who are having trouble determining whether to go back to their offices. Can they go back to work? Of course, with the vaccines, we've been talking about that and the issue of mandatory vaccinations and should they take it? And what if they don't take it? Can they take their own employer to court, etc.? Well, there are a couple of other areas of law that I will tell you and hazard to guess are even more important right now for people who have to live with issues on a daily basis. That's people in family law disputes, people dealing with estate issues. For example, people determining in a dispute with a significant other, where are their kids going? Are they going to go back to in-class learning? Issues about divorces, issues about all sorts of disputes that take place between two people when a marriage or a relationship breaks down. And then, of course, there are the estate issues that people are dealing with, powers of attorney and wills, things they may not even have thought about before the pandemic. So let's talk about these areas of law, which I'm going to say is really right now probably not only filling the courts with a lot of disputes, but also causing a lot of angst for the people involved who, of course, for all of us having to deal with a pandemic, but then having to deal with these legal disputes at the same time, the stress levels must be just so high at this particular point in time. I want to bring in a veteran family law lawyer, one of Canada's top family law lawyers, Michael Cochrane, to join me to talk about these issues. And hi, Michael, welcome to Judgment Day.
Hey, Lauren, thanks for having me on.
Am I right in saying, I think I use the term hazard to guess because I don't practice in the area as you do, but am I right in saying that family law and the issues surrounding all those different issues that you deal with in your practice have really been exacerbated, increased because of this pandemic?
Yeah, I would say there isn't an area of family law that hasn't been touched by the pandemic, and that starts with one of the items you mentioned in the introduction about parenting and parents being able to pick schools for their kids. But aside from that, the impact on incomes and the consequences that had for support, the impact it had on property division. So for example, somebody had a business that needed to be valued as of the day they separated. Let's say in most cases, businesses have gone down in value post COVID's arrival, which means it had an impact on the way that families are dividing their property. Even as far wide as common law couples being hit by this, because there are people who were forced to live together. Maybe they were on the brink of separating, and all of a sudden a common law couple finds out, well, we've been living together now for 3 or more years, and there are certain obligations and rights that go along with that. So there isn't an area that it hasn't touched. And it's been painful and probably extra painful because the courts can't deal with anything, really. The courts ground to a halt. There were no hearings.
Right.
I can give you one example. A few months ago, I wanted to book a court hearing. The first date they gave me, January of 2022 in Toronto. So if you need things done, it can be very tough in the justice system. So everything's been touched.
Yeah, and I, of course, in my own practice, have been dealing with it. We all have, and I guess again, when you deal with so many urgent issues that have to be dealt with as quickly as possible. Let me go to one area, and that is the issue of schooling or choice of schooling. I know there have been a series of cases that came out. I remember last fall. They're coming out now, and where parents who have these joint custody issues may have different ideas. One parent wants online, one parent wants in schooling. How have the courts been dealing with this?
Well, you're right to mention that back last fall, because some of the cases that we're seeing now in fall 2021 are the same kinds of cases we saw fall 2020.
Right.
And probably the best way to talk about it is look at the example of a little girl who was 10 years old, Elise. Her parents couldn't agree on whether she should stay home from school or she should be back in the classroom. Mom took the position that the little girl was at risk of being exposed to COVID if she went into the classroom. Dad said, no, I think she should be back in the classroom. And the court, on very short notice, had to deal with the question of how are we going to figure out these
Right.
debates. And I would say one of the starting points that came from a very good decision from a judge in Hamilton, Justice Pazaratz, right at the beginning of the pandemic, a case called Ribeiro. He said that the starting point is going to be that for parents who have a certain regime in place, say it's joint custody or some kind of residential schedule, that's going to be honored regardless of COVID. So don't think that because COVID hits, you're going to be able to grab that child and keep them in your house and not send them over to the other house. So the presumption was, let's follow the schedules that we have. That then left the question of, well, what if these two households that have a child moving back and forth can't agree on something as significant as what school this child is, whether they're going to go into the classroom or not?
Right.
So the court looked at this 10-year-old girl situation back in August of 2020. And they said, first of all, the starting point is we're going to do what's best for her. That's easy. What's best for her? Well, they developed a list of criteria that the court wanted to look at. What were that little girl's connections with the school academically, athletically? What was going to be the impact on her mental health if she wasn't allowed to mix with her friends?
Right.
Interestingly, even what were what's the situation in the respective parents' homes? Is there somebody in one of the homes that's an elderly person who's maybe vulnerable to COVID? Is there somebody in the other home that maybe has to work through the day and they're not going to be there to supervise the online learning? So they had to balance all of these things. And it was interesting in this case involving the 10-year-old that the court actually dug into some details about what are the rates of infection and exposure for kids. And they found that at that time, there were 31 kids in Ontario out of 1.6 million who were going to school who had exposure to COVID and were being treated for it.
But that was a year ago. That was a year ago.
That was a year ago. But interestingly, the judge then also said, what's the rate of meningitis? Well, meningitis was 13 something per million kids, and COVID was 1 per million. So looking at that kind of scientific evidence and deferring to government plans, which was another thing that the court wanted to defer to what the government's doing.
Right. What they always do. They've done it in every COVID case I've looked at.
So the court said, given that, we don't keep kids home for online learning because there's a much higher risk of meningitis. So in the case of the 10-year-old, the court said, no, the best thing for this little girl is to get her back in a classroom. So then fast forward now, a year later, to this latest case, and it was in Mississauga. A very good judge, Justice Trimble, looked at the situation, and I think showing a real human touch in his decision. He started it off by saying, most parents are worried about what color pencil case the child should have.
That used to be the word.
Yeah. And what kind of do they have a cool knapsack? And he said, here, some parents are deciding whether the child's even going to go to school. And that case, if you can believe it, involved a child who was about to go to junior kindergarten. And mom wanted the child to go and dad didn't. Court went through all the criteria that I just mentioned a minute ago, added a few more, which trying to balance this issue about endangerment that may be in the homes. In that case, the dad had an elderly mother and father with whom he was living, diabetic situation for the mom. So the court was saying, we got to balance all this stuff, but still, that little girl's going to junior kindergarten.
Right.
In 2021.
Yeah, interesting. And that's because things are different now than they were a year ago. And but yet, as you say, so the courts are I guess deferring again to the whole issue of in person is better. And you know what? To that regard, Michael, I think so many parents, listening to this, watching this now will say, we kept our kids home because school was shut. but there was so much harm done to these kids of not being able to be with other kids. And I
Yeah.
guess the courts have to balance that now. They didn't really have to do that last year, but I think now that they've had a year to see, that's going to be part of the balance, isn't it?
Yeah, and I would say that have you met a parent that says that online learning has been fantastic?
No,
No.
no.
Every parent I've ever talked to, and I mean, I don't fault anybody who's delivering the teachers who are attempting to do this. I've talked to teachers too who say this is not the way they want to teach children. So
Right.
so um, you're
That
right.
was just the phone ringing that I had to shut off. No
I mean,
problem.
it's new client already.
Not
So
for me, but let me just do this. Let me do this, Michael. Sorry, because I do want to move on to a whole. But so obviously, the important takeaway, of course, is that with school starting and as we see this happening now, the cases are certainly, there's a lot more cases going on now than even at this short time. I'm sure you're going to have parents who are going to want to change these things, correct? I mean, you're going to have people who are looking at the cases going up and saying, I got to get into court, I want to pull my kid out, and my ex won't agree with that.
yeah, and Justice Trimble said at the end of his decision, that one involving the little girl going to junior kindergarten, he said, the landscape is written in sand, not stone. So I would expect to see this kind of evolve over time. And I think we're going to wait and see October, November. What happens when all these kids come home from school? Is there going to be another wave of illness in homes because these kids have now maybe asymptomatically brought it back into their home? So I
Yeah.
would say the takeaway is stay tuned.
And I think the next area for you and all you family law lawyers dealing with issues of children are going to be November, December. That's what we're hearing when all of a sudden science says, yes, we have a vaccination for kids. And what's going to happen there as they become available for the young people? You're going to be running into exactly those same situations, aren't you, Michael, about best interest of the child and how are those decisions going to be made if one parent said vaccinate and one parent says no?
Yeah, and there's one case out of Quebec already that has caused a little bit of worry about these battles. But certainly in the common law provinces, we're going to see a lot of litigation over whether children are even going to be vaccinated. That's been going on no matter what, even for the flu.
Right, that's true. Yeah.
Let
Uh,
me let me tell you about something else though, that because I know we only got about 15 minutes, but I wanted to mention this other issue that's going on. It's caused by COVID. But it's also caused by the real estate market in Toronto in particular,
right,
GT.
right,
So everybody knows housing prices are off the meter. Um, Typically, when families separate, there's a bit of a discussion about one parent buying out the other parent's interest in a home because for the children, they want to keep them in the same school. They don't want to have to move out of a catchment area.
right.
So there's a bit of a discussion about what's the value of the home. They all know they've all got mortgages, big ones in many cases, home equity line of credit, killing people, killing families. But they get an opinion typically from a real estate agent or an appraiser, and then somebody says, I'll buy you out, and we work out a price. That's not possible right now in the GTA because the parents look at it and they say, well, let's see what the market says this house is worth. I read that a house 2 blocks from ours sold for 400,000 over list. It's impossible right now, virtually impossible, for parents to buy each other out. And this is bad for families, because there are kids who are not just going from their catchment area, they're going out of Toronto. Because if you take
Right.
a house in Toronto and you sell it and you pay off that mortgage or home equity line of credit, and each parent's getting a little bit of the equity that's left over, they're not buying another house in Toronto. They're buying in Brantford or Bugtussle, Ontario, where they can actually put a deposit down on
Right.
something.
Right.
It's quite an impact. And you put COVID over top of that, where they're not only going, whether they go back to school, it's what's the new school district? Where do we go from here? Are we both even going to live in the same town? It's
So So
They,
another layer, again, as I said about exacerbating these issues.
yeah, and
And,
another one's kind of related to that too is obviously COVID's had an impact on income, and certain people are paying child support orders or spousal support orders based on an income they had in 2018, 2019.
oh
Their
yeah,
income crashed, and somebody's running a household dependent on a certain level of child and spousal support, but the money's not there anymore. You can't take a 50% or 75% reduction in income and keep paying the same level of support. So households have had to adjust to this consequence.
and
It's
you've
been,
had to go, and I get, is it that you have to now go to court for those people to get an order to vary those spousal support orders?
you do, and it's tough to get time with a judge because they are dealing typically with emergencies, and if you can believe it, that's not considered an emergency. An emergency is child's going to be abducted and planes on the tarmac.
Right.
It's tough to get to court time for that. A lot of people are pushing these things off into mediations and arbitrations to get private arbitrators to deal with it, but you can only do that if both parties consent. So if you're
Yeah.
waiting for somebody to pay you $7,000 a month in spousal support and $3,000 in child support, you're going to just keep that order and let the arrears build up until somebody is able to do something about it.
It's incredible because I started talking about all this saying, because I know the area of law that you're dealing with, we've talked about this before, the disputes by themselves, by their very nature, cause so much stress for the people involved. And then, as I said, you get your pandemic issues that just exacerbate it, pile on top of it. And I'm just thinking down the road, we're talking about November, December. We're talking about, well, there's going to be the vaccination issues that you're going to have to deal with. And then, of course, you've always told me, I remember you once told me that one of the busiest times for all family law lawyers is Christmas, and around there when people are talking about where's the child going and whatever. And I can't even imagine, because I don't know what it's going to be like here, what it's going to be like for you this year, especially if this fourth wave continues and we have all these issues with kids.
Most family law lawyers have a weather Doppler on their computer so they can monitor weather conditions around Christmas, because you'd be surprised the thousands of kids that are being moved from one house to another Christmas Day at 12 noon. And
Really.
the weather affects whether they get from Scarborough to Guelph or Guelph
Right.
to Niagara. It's
Unbelievable. So, and that you'll have to, obviously it'll be more. So let me go to this other area that I know you deal with. And I, from what I read, has had a significant, the pandemic has had a significant impact on, and that's what we call estate law, where more people would understand it, talking about wills, talking about powers of attorney. And I assume, as I said off the top, this pandemic probably made many people start thinking about, oh, I don't have a will, or I don't have a power of attorney, or if I do, how am I going to exercise it, especially if a loved one has now become incapacitated? Have we seen a real bump in cases in that area?
well, if people didn't need an excuse to have a will or power of attorney before, they sure have one now, because there are lots of families that look around and they see an elderly parent sick with COVID, or they see their spouse sick with COVID, or they worry that it's going to happen. And they've now stepped back and said, okay, it's finally time to deal with this. Let's get powers of attorney and let's get our wills done. And when we talk to people about those things, because that's the cheapest service you can get from a lawyer. Lawyers don't make money on powers of attorney and wills.
Right.
Most lawyers do it as a loss leader to meet clients. So don't think that you're going to be ripped off by going to see a lawyer to get a will or a power of attorney. It's very, very inexpensive. But anyways, the powers of attorney are becoming extremely important, because people need to know that someone is there to make decisions about their finances and about their personal care in the event something happens. Because you go into hospital with COVID, people who know or who have been through this with a sick one over the last year, you're lucky if you can visit that person 1 or 2 times a week.
Right.
They don't let you into the hospital. Certainly not more than one person is going to be going in there. So these powers of attorney are critically important. But that also raises this issue, and it's one that I want to get the word out on, is in my view, and in other lawyers, and certainly some judges I've talked to, the abuse of powers of attorney is probably the fraud of our generation. And this is the situation where somebody gives a power of attorney to a son or son-in-law or daughter or whatever to manage their money, or to a friend. And the power of attorney is abused. It's not managed properly. Maybe the person thinks they're doing the right thing, but they end up being challenged. And usually what happens is the power of attorney functions while the person who is, we'll say, incapacitated, let's say somebody gets Alzheimer's, they're incapacitated, but they're alive. Somebody's making decisions with the power of attorney, affecting their personal care, maybe in long-term care facility, and managing their property, looking after their bank accounts, their investment, maybe renting out a house that's left vacant, something like that. They're doing all of that stuff. And then the minute they pass away, that power of attorney is no longer effective. The executor of the estate takes over and has to account to all the beneficiaries in that will, if there is one, about what happened
Right.
with money between the time that person became incapable and the time they're administering this estate. So that estate trustee then, and the beneficiaries, who are usually the kids, look back over that period of time that the power of attorney was being used, and they have questions, hundreds of questions. Why did you pay this? Where's the receipt for that? You didn't get enough rent for mom's house. You shouldn't have sold mom's house. You should have sold mom's house. You missed the peak of the market, on and on and on and on. So the message that should get out to people is you absolutely got to have a power of attorney, but the person you pick to do it has to be someone who wants the job, can do the job, and you can trust to make decisions not only that are in your best interest, but maybe not even what you tell them to do, because a power of attorney's obligation is to make decisions that are good for the person that they're trying to help, whether that's what that person wants or not. You know, you could have an Alzheimer person say, no, I want to give all my grandchildren $100,000. That might not be in that person's interest, and the power of attorney could say, no, I'm not doing that.
And so have you seen how this has played out during the pandemic?
Oh my gosh, the cases that we're seeing, I just had one conclude recently where there was a challenge, and the expression you hear is the estate trustee is asked to pass accounts. They have to go into the court process and they have to show
What they did.
Manage things.
Yeah.
That means produce receipts, et cetera, and explain, how they manage the money, why they made their decisions, that they do reasonable things.
Right.
We're now seeing those come forward where people who've had powers of attorney and they've abused them. And in some cases, it's a form of elder abuse. One very spectacular case that I saw recently that was reported involved a woman up in Thunder Bay, elderly woman, 90 years old, named Jean. And she had a neighbor named Tina. And Jean, obviously at age 90, was in decline.
Right.
The thing that we know is that she's given Tina a power of attorney for personal care and property. And she's made Tina the estate trustee of her will. And she's made Tina a beneficiary of the will. And within days, Jean, the elderly woman, has suddenly transferred $250,000 to Tina and transferred $195,000 to Tina's niece. And the next thing, within a few days, Jean's diagnosed with Alzheimer's. A few weeks later, Jean's in long-term care. A few weeks after that, Tina's son is living in Jean's house, and on and on and on and on. So that case, when there was the passing of the accounts, the court went through it and said, this is a complete mismanagement of Jean's money. It's all suspicious. And Tina had to reimburse the estate $345,000.
Well, and you see, and of course, because of the pandemic and because people are having so many financial problems, again, like as you said, the unfortunate way that this may facilitate fraud, because people are looking for that type of money, and it's unconscionable to think about that people do that, but they do. And
They do it because maybe their salary is evaporated due to COVID and they need the money. So they just say, well, I'll borrow it from the estate, or I'll borrow it, I'll loan myself money. I had a case where the power of attorney had loaned the entire estate out to family members. No terms of repayment, no interest. When the court found out, I thought the judge was going to come right off the bench to deal with the woman who had done this. But
right.
That doesn't mean you shouldn't go get a power of attorney. That just means you should pick the right person, somebody you can trust, who's honest, who's got the skills to do it, and wants the job. Pick somebody who wants the job.
Well, and you're the guy that wants the job dealing with these family disputes. I give you credit, Michael. I always told you that, and you and all the family law lawyers that I know that have to deal with that. So
There's a client calling already, eh?
yeah, I don't know. I guess what I should have done is, when you can teach me one day, is how to shut off your phone. Okay, but listen, I really do. On a serious note, Michael, I appreciate you coming on board, getting us up to speed on this. It's like I said right off the top. Yeah, we got an election coming up, all really important. Everybody's really concerned. But we deal with clients who are dealing with real life problems and especially you. I always say, in practices with family law practice, you're dealing with crises that are happening on a daily basis. And with this pandemic, exacerbating it, to use the word I use, it must be for you nonstop having to try and help these people deal with this, because every minute for them, it's not days, every minute for them is crucial.
It's urgent and it's emotional for people. And I'll tell you that there's more coming down the pipe, because in 2022, we have a bunch of changes to estate law that are going to be of interest to people. And we might want to talk about that on another episode.
100%. You know what you just did? You did what we call what we used to call in the television business, a tease. That will bring you back. We'll bring you back, Michael, and when this happens, and all the best to you and to the family, and we will talk soon.
Good. Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
That is Michael Cochrane, who has worked in the family law business for quite some time, and he's seen so many different things. And he and I, we talked recently before, obviously before the show, and that's what made me think I better get him on Judgment Day, because he just said to me, you just won't believe what the pandemic's been doing to the world of family law and estate law, and the stresses that it has put on already a really stressed area that people have to deal with. And you just think about it. I was just as I was listening to him, all the different areas, somebody who has to give, who is providing spousal support, but the pandemic has caused them to lose so much of their income, how that affects and of course, all the decisions surrounding children, which before the pandemic had presented so many different problems and different issues. And of course, and then talking about estates and powers of attorney and what people have done to take advantage of some other people. And as Michael said, that there's a lot going to be happening in that area. And we, of course, will keep an eye on it. And we'll talk more about this in the days and weeks to come. All right. Well, thank you. That's this edition of Judgment Day. I want to thank you all for joining me, whether you're watching me on YouTube or you are listening to me on one of the many different podcast platforms. Thank you very much. Until next time, bye, everyone.